The Seventh Tower by Garth Nix. Book 5. Into Battle. Chapter 1. High on the road up the mountain of light, in a tent made from tightly sewn Reska hides, Milla sat in a chair carved from the single lower jawbone of an infant Selski. Outside the wind howled, and blown ice and snow struck the tent's wall with a constant rattle. The bone chair was enormous, and made Milla seem smaller than she was, like a child pretending to join her elders. The chair had been carried up the mountain path by 8 shield maidens, with considerable effort and danger. It was ancient, and the arms, seat, and back were engraved with hundreds of small images from Icecarl history and legend. Next to Milla's hand, for example, there was a thumbnail-sized picture of the fabled Ulla Strongarm wrestling a merwin, its horn about to be snapped off by the ferocious Icecarl. Milla felt a twinge in her side as she looked at the tiny picture, the scar aching once again where a merwin's horn had almost fatally injured her. She knew without a doubt that no one could wrestle a merwin, but at the same time she didn't doubt that Ulla Strongarm had done it. Milla looked at some of the other pictures, and wondered if the heroes of Icecarl history felt like she did, an impostor who wasn't fit to be the stuff of legend. She was no longer Milla of the Far Raiders. She was now Milla Talonhand, the living sword of Astir and war chief of the Icecarls. The glowing violet fingernail of magical crystal she wore on her right hand was the legendary weapon of her far ancestor Danir. She was sitting on the ancient thinking chair of Grettir. She wore the finest silver Ursik furs. A bone circlet, itself carved with tiny pictures of Icecarl triumph, secured her blonde hair in place. A shield of mirror-bright shell leaned against the throne. It was ancient, too, a relic from distant times when the Icecarls had needed to defend themselves from light magic. Next to it was a merwin horn sword. It wasn't the one Milla had left stuck in the shoulder of the dark vizier Sushin back in the castle, but an older weapon. It still had a faint glow, which would make it effective against spirit shadows. Milla sat on the thinking chair, wondering what she was doing. She might be called war chief, but in practice, she spent a lot of time waiting for the crones to tell her what to do. Since they had bound her with the prayer of Astir, she had no choice but to obey, as did her spirit shadow, Audris. "It's better than being dead," said that spirit shadow now, rising up from under the chair to hang in the air in front of Milla's gloomy face. "Stop knowing what I'm thinking," snapped Milla, even though she knew it was no use. Audris was linked to her too strongly now, both by the original binding that had been made in the spirit world of Einir, and by the prayer of Astir. They would be together until one of them died. "Stop thinking about dying," Audris snapped back. "I don't know why there's such a fog inside you. You're the war chief, the leader of the expedition against the castle. Probably the most famous Icecarl alive. They're making up songs about you already. I heard one that goes, 'Mighty the one-eyed merwin, small the slender shield maiden, bright the sunstone's brilliance, darting the dagger drives. Home it sinks in hoary hide, Milla more than merwin's match.'" "That's all wrong," interrupted Milla, shaking her head. "I'm not a shield maiden, and I never will be. Plus, Tau was the one who blinded the merwin with his sunstone, not me. And even if I did kill the merwin, what else have I done right? I broke all the laws. I lost my shadow. I should have been left to die on the ice." "You're just sulking because we've had to sit here for too long," said Audris. "Don't worry. The crones will come up with some sort of airweed soon, and then we'll conquer the castle and send all the spirit shadows back to Einir. Then we can go back as well, and you can, I don't know, start a small farm or get a fishing boat or something." "Audris, I'm an Icecarl," Milla protested. "This is my world. I don't want to live in Einir, and I am not a farmer or a fisher. I am a warrior." "So you should be happy," grumbled Audris. "You make me feel ill with your sadness." Silence returned, save for the howling of the wind outside. Audris slid back to the floor. Milla brooded on her chair, but only for a few more minutes. We have sat here too long, Milla announced. She leaped up, pulled her heavy outer coat from the back of the chair and put it on, slipping the white bone mask over her face before raising the hood and pulling it tight. Then she buckled on her sword and slung the mirror shell shield on her back. I take it we're going somewhere, Audrus asked with a sigh. Can I have some more light? Milla raised her hand, and the sunstone ring on her third finger suddenly shone brightly, eclipsing the greenish light from the moth lanterns that hung from the massive poles in each corner of the tent. Where are we going, by the way? Audrus asked as Milla pulled back the heavy furs that closed the doorway. Together they stepped out into the horizontal waves of wind-driven snow. The crones have had long enough to find airweed, Milla shouted. I left some at the Heatway Tunnel entrance, enough for me to go back through and organize the underfolk to bring out a whole lot more. Audrus shrugged as she slipped into place at Milla's heels. A shrug that suggested that going back into the castle through the heatways wouldn't be as easy as Milla made it sound. At least they were heading in the right direction, as far as Audrus was concerned. Back to plenty of sunstone light and Adris, her fellow storm shepherd, now also a spirit shadow. Audrus hadn't wanted to leave the castle in the first place, but Milla had been determined to warn the ice carls of the danger to the Vale, not to mention wanting to give herself to the ice. Fortunately, it had all turned out better than Audrus had feared. It took Audrus a few seconds to coordinate herself to Milla's quick movements once they were outside. Although the crones had allowed Audrus unlimited freedom, ordinary ice carls were much more comfortable when she tried to behave like a normal shadow. In her natural form in Einir, she was a cloud, and could easily shift shape. She had retained this ability to a certain extent as a spirit shadow, but she was never fast enough to match her movements to Milla's. No one who saw her sliding along behind or to the side, copying Milla's actions a few seconds late, would ever doubt that she was actually a spirit shadow. Even with the bright light from Milla's sunstone, it was hard to see the full ice-carl host camped along the road, as the snow was still falling heavily and swirling sideways into the mountain. Every few stretches there would be a moth lantern or two tied to a bone stake driven into the side of the mountain, and the corner of a tent would become visible, or a stack of supplies. There were also many shield maidens and ice-carl hunters who would suddenly appear out of the whirling snow. Whatever they were doing, they would stop and clap their fists together in greeting as Milla approached. She had to pause and clap her fists in turn, so it took a long time just to walk 100 stretches from Milla's tent down the road. Eventually, she arrived at the point where the entry to the Heatway tunnels was marked by 2 huge flaming tubs of Selski oil. The entrance was guarded by a full hand of shield maidens in shell mirror armor. They carried shadow sacks, shadow bottles, and spears with tips that were heavily coated with luminous algae. The equipment and the luminous algae had all come from secret stores in the rune ship. The crones had thrown open the ice-carl's ancient arsenal, releasing many weapons that were specifically designed to fight Einirian shadows. The chosen of the castle had forgotten the ancient war between the Dark World and the creatures of Einir, but the ice-carl crones had not. Through the centuries they had maintained both weapons and knowledge, ready for the war they knew must one day resume. The shield maidens clapped their fists together as Milla approached, but Milla was not fooled. There was a reluctance in their greeting. They were wary of her and Audrus. She couldn't see their eyes through the amber lenses of their face masks, but she could tell from the set of their heads that they were ready to defend themselves if she went mad and attacked them. Milla might command the shield maidens, but that was never what she wanted. She wanted to be one of them, and still did. But she knew it was impossible. She had lost her shadow, brought a spirit shadow to the ice, and she had slain the shield mother Arla. There was no going back for her. She could only go forward. "We greet you, war chief," said the shield mother of this hand. Milla didn't know her name. So many shield maidens and hunters had come, and even 3 or 4 sword thanes. Many more were still on the way across the ice, though there were already almost 2,000 ice carls camped all along the road from the rune ship up the Mountain of Light. Another 1,000 or more were kept busy hunting the ice below for food to feed the host, and there was a continuous line of carriers and carters taking food and supplies between the rune ship below and the various encampments on the road. "I am going into the heatways," announced Milla, raising her voice so it would carry over the wind. "Please tell the crone Malin that I will be some time." "No need," said a voice beyond the shield maidens. A moment later a figure materialized out of the whirling snow. A slim young woman, perhaps a circling older than Milla, who wore the light black furs of a crone. She carried no weapons and did not wear a face mask despite the wind and stinging snow. Her eyes were bright blue and glowed with an unnatural light, marking her as a crone, the blue signifying she was one of the youngest of the 3 orders. In time, her eyes would turn silver, and then cloudy and white. "What do you intend?" asked Malin. She spoke easily enough, but Milla grimaced as she heard it. Because of the prayer of a steer, she had to obey the commands of the crones, who spoke with one voice. In this case, it meant obeying the commands of Malin. The young crone was bound to stop her, Milla thought. She tensed, trying to resist the command before it came. "We are taking too long to find a substitute for the underfolk's airweed," Milla said as calmly as she could. "I left some near the Heatway entrance. Using it, I will go back through the tunnels and find the Free Folk rebels. I am sure they will help me bring plenty of airweed back if we agree to free them from the Chosen when we take the castle." Malin listened in silence. Her eyes clouded a little, the luminosity dimming. Milla knew this meant she was communicating with other crones. They were seeing through her eyes, listening through the young crone's ears. Any decision that came would be from all the crones, or at least all of those who chose to participate. It wouldn't be just from Malin. Even so, Milla almost hated the other girl. She had everything Milla had always wanted. Not to be a crone, but to have a proper place, to have the respect of the Shield Maidens, to be adored by her clan. "Yes," Malin said finally. "We have taken too long, and there is no sign we will succeed in our search for airweed under the ice. It is best that you find the Free Folk and get them to bring airweed. I will come with you." "There's not—" Milla started to say, "not enough airweed," but the words never came out, because she knew that there was enough airweed for 2 if they were careful, and Malin's eyes were fixed on her own. Milla knew the crone would feel the lie. "Come on, then," Milla said gruffly. Milla climbed up to the Heatway entrance as the Shield Maidens clapped their fists together again. This time it was more for the crone, Milla knew. She ignored that and crawled inside.